My name is Branka Dimitrijević, and I'm also Director of Mainstreaming Innovation. It is a joint project of 9 Scottish universities that supports collaboration between researchers and Scottish construction industry in developing and testing innovations for more sustainable low-carbon infrastructure and for its integration into the built environment. The project is funded by Scottish Government. Before we continue with our webinar, just a few housekeeping points related to a potential fire alarm or maybe some online disruptions. If that happens, we will try to continue, and you can rejoin us by rejoining the webinar. We will also, of course, save the video recording of this webinar on our website, so you can always watch it a few days later if you cannot continue to watch during all the time of the webinar. So I also would like to say a few words about our project before we continue. The project is about integration of low-carbon infrastructures. And on this slide, you see what infrastructures we are talking about. It is about landscape and biodiversity, which can be used to mitigate climate change, but also it is a resource that we use. Then we talk about energy efficiency of buildings, generation of energy from renewables, storage and use of that energy, low carbon transport, waste and water, and of course the use of information communication technology or ICT to manage and monitor all these infrastructures. We believe that that is the next stage of development of low carbon infrastructures. That is not to look only into each one separately, but how they can be integrated and how we can better use resources in that way and achieve better efficiencies and of course reduce costs. So today's webinar is really about funding that is available for these different infrastructures. The title of the webinar is Overview of the Scottish Government Community and Renewables Energy Scheme, CARES, which has been in place for some time and has funded different projects of this type. Our speaker today is James Buchan of Local Energy Scotland, and I would like to welcome him and to thank you for coming to Glasgow Caledonian University today to talk about this funding program. So now over to you.
Many thanks, Branka. As Branka has mentioned, my name is James Buchan. I'm the Local Energy Scotland Development Officer for the CARES scheme, and I cover Teesside in central Scotland, which is generally from Angus down through Dundee, Perth and Kinross, Falkirk, Clackmannanshire, and Fife as well. Just going to give a general overview of the CARES scheme first of all. The Scottish Government launched the scheme in February 2011. Generally, the motivation for that would be the 2020 targets for renewable energy. It's established to promote and encourage local and community ownership of renewable energy across Scotland. CARES is delivered by Local Energy Scotland. That's a nationwide consortium dedicated to enabling community and local uptake of renewable energy projects. Under the umbrella of the Energy Saving Trust, we have regional organisations, the Energy Agency in Ayrshire, Changeworks in Edinburgh and the Highlands, the Scarfor organisation in the North East of Scotland, and the WISE Group in the Glasgow area. The CARES scheme itself aims to provide support to communities and rural businesses on renewables. The type of support that we can help with includes things like technical issues associated with renewable technology, financial issues such as raising development funding and indeed capital funding as well. We can assist with governance structures, getting communities into a sort of legal entity that they can take advantage of funding and take projects forward, whether that be, for instance, a company limited by guarantee, a cooperative. That's some of the structures that I'm familiar with. We can also assist communities with the use of income from projects through helping to develop community action plans. Always can advise that from the outset. It gives a kind of robust mandate for spending the funds, basically, when they get to the receiving the revenue stage there as well. And another part of our work is providing support to encourage innovative solutions in the renewable energy community industry. CARES was recently recognised by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development as an example of good practice in bottom-up approaches to renewable energy development. Just an overview of where we're coming from. Designed to accelerate progress towards the Scottish Government's target of 500 megawatts of renewable energy locally or community owned by 2020, and to maximise the benefit to communities from commercially owned energy. This is detailed in the Scottish Government's 2020 route map for renewable energy. Now, what do we mean by community and locally owned in terms of the 2020 route map and the 500 megawatt targets? So that would be renewable energy owned by, for instance, community groups, charitable organisations, public bodies indeed, further and higher education establishments, local authorities, housing associations, local Scottish businesses, and Scottish farms, estates, rural landowners as well. To give you an idea of the mix of ownership of these types of projects, the Energy Saving Trust has produced a report based on figures up to June 2012. And we can see from the slide around a third of locally owned renewable energy would be from the agricultural sector, basically farms and estates, rural landowners. Around 20% from housing associations. Housing associations, obviously having a large housing stock, are certainly keen to promote energy efficiency, renewable energy generation in their estates as well. Local authorities, local businesses and communities, broadly a similar share, and the public sector and charitable organisations as well. Now, where are we at the moment? These are obviously figures from June 2012, and there certainly has been some movement on that since. But at that point, we estimated around 204 megawatts of community and locally owned renewable energy capacity operational in Scotland. That's generally over 5,000 individual renewable energy installations, generally split about 88 megawatts of electrical capacity and around 120 megawatts of thermal capacity, renewable heat generation. Over the year, community and locally owned renewables are expected to produce around 233 gigawatt hours of electricity and a broadly similar amounts of heat generated also. To give you an idea of where we are moving into the future, there is further 647 megawatts of community or locally owned renewable energy capacity in different stages of development, although perhaps in light of recent events with the Viking projects in Shetland, with the consent being set aside for that at the moment, will make that target a wee bit more challenging. but certainly moving in the right direction there as well. It's interesting to look at the amount of projects that are actually consented but not yet built, around 266 megawatts, an additional 172 megawatts in planning, and around 126 megawatts at the scoping stage as well. So certainly moving in the right direction. So just an overview of Local Energy Scotland. We aim to be a one-stop shop which can provide advice, support, financial assistance to community groups and rural businesses who wish to generate renewable energy, or indeed gain benefit from local commercial renewable energy schemes as well. It's free and impartial advice. We're funded by the Scottish Government. And like I say, we can provide assistance to communities to access grant funding, loan funding, so that they can benefit from local renewable energy generation. We offer a wide range of different support. Initially, we can offer free advice and support to help communities and rural businesses develop renewable energy schemes. Sometimes we get approached by groups in quite different stages of development, whether it be a very initial idea or indeed just a desire to have a look at the options that may be available for renewable energy generation. Some people come with reasonably well developed projects seeking advice on, for instance, the capital stages and the construction stages. So from an idea inception straight through to construction of a project, we can provide support and assistance and advice in relation to that. A large part of our work is providing advice on funding streams available to communities and rural groups in relation to development. CARES itself offers a number of funding streams, including grants and pre-development loans there as well. And we also provide support to access the Renewable Energy Investment Fund, which I'll discuss at length a bit later. That's through the Scottish Enterprise. Additionally, we can provide grant support for developing energy projects on community buildings. Generally, this is associated with more deprived areas at the moment, but there is plans to develop that into more rural areas as well. The motivation being that more deprived communities tend to be in an urban situation, while we're seeking to recognise that high fuel costs and fuel poverty as such can be quite prevalent in rural locations, especially when you are off the mains gas grid. We can provide grant support for communities who are in the very initial stages of considering a project, either to build capacity in the group, to get themselves set up legally and constitutionally wise to take projects forward. And throughout whatever stage of development is, we can provide advice on the options for financing renewable energy schemes as well. We also offer advice on partnership, joint venture developments and arrangements with commercial developments, which certainly in my role is becoming more prevalent. Developers seeking to work with communities in order to provide positive planning decisions and indeed bring benefit to the local communities in which these developments are occurring. As mentioned, we do offer support in working with commercial developments, and we have a number of toolkits, publications that can provide help and assistance alongside assistance from the regional development officers in relation to working with commercial developers, from an initial approach to a developer, from perhaps a joint venture arrangement with a developer, and indeed receiving funds from developers from renewable energy installations. As part of an energy saving trust consortium, we also can signpost groups, other organisations to areas of other support, including advice on the renewable heat incentive and the feed-in tariff, and indeed, for all intents and purposes, the ROCs and the contracts for difference scheme when that comes out, and assistance to access schemes such as the Warm Homes Fund, which are additionally managed by the Energy Saving Trust. Now, Local Energy Scotland and the CARE scheme operates a network of development officers across the whole of Scotland. We've found that it's very useful for groups and communities to be able to have local access to advice through the CARE scheme, and we do operate a number of local regional offices in Aberdeenshire, Central Scotland and Tayside, which is under my remit, Dumfries and Galloway, Edinburgh and South East Scotland, which would include the Scottish borders and the Fife area, Glasgow and West Central Scotland, the Western Isles, Argyll and Bute. We do have a development officer covering Orkney and Shetland, the Highlands and Ayrshire also. So a good geographic spread available for communities to approach a local development officer. We found also by maintaining that network of geographically based development officers, the development officers themselves can gain good local knowledge of particular circumstances in that local area, whether it be planning policy, an idea of the resource in that local area, networking opportunities for groups to meet with other groups who are perhaps undertaking similar projects in their area as well, and provide networking opportunities, learning opportunities for groups to interact with one another. So to give you an idea of the process that groups would go through, as mentioned previously, we do have projects coming to us in various stages of development, but generally we can have initial contact with Local Energy Scotland from a community group. That could either be through access through the website. We do have a generic telephone number, which is centrally staffed, but can then distribute inquiries to the local development officers. Groups can also, through the website, submit an expression of interest with a general idea of the project, and this can then be disseminated to the local development officer, who will then contact the groups to explore a wee bit further what the idea for the project is, and then offer a tailored advice and identify the support options that may be available depending on the type of project. As mentioned previously, a large part of our role is assisting communities in building their capacity. You'll find a variety of capacities in different groups. Some groups have quite a low capacity, and it's introducing them to perhaps training opportunities and assistance that way. Some groups have reasonably high capacity. For instance, do have some groups where there are, for instance, retired engineers, financial people there as well. So it's about identifying where we can have skills gaps in groups for projects, offers tailored support in order to increase that capacity as well. And then ultimately we can identify appropriate funding schemes to support the community groups to take their proposals forward. For rural applicants, because we do have two general streams, community applicants and rural applicants, small to medium rural enterprises, landowners, generally they can contact us through a similar process, either by telephone, through an expression of interest through the website, or indeed directly contacting the development officer. A similar process goes through there. Identify the type of project, ask a bit more information about that, and through that we can identify support options and tailor our advice to projects appropriately. And then we can offer full access to the CARES pre-planning loan, which can offer advice to the early development stages of projects. There are a range of ways for communities to take ownership of renewable energy projects. It's probably worth highlighting the variety of ways which communities can become involved in renewable energy projects. We can have 100% community-owned projects. Obviously, through that, there'll be a higher financial return to the community, but associated with that, there is increased risk and responsibility. And that's where it's good to highlight capacity in groups and explain and explore perhaps the opportunities for joint venture development with other developers. I have seen quite a lot of that, and it's something the Scottish Government are keen to promote as joint ventures between communities and developers. And the other way in which communities can benefit from renewable energy projects is through community benefit from externally owned projects there as well. Large companies, for instance, Scottish Power, Scottish and Southern, have community benefit funds. We can assist groups to get themselves organised in order to take advantage of those funds and distribute them appropriately. So, the financial support that is available through the CARES scheme, we have a number of different streams, as you can see there, and I'll explore these a wee bit further. We can help community groups and rural businesses to access that financial support through the Scottish Government's CARES scheme. We have a startup grant for community groups for early stage work, capacity building, governance in groups there as well. We also have a community buildings grant, which is available specifically for communities rather than rural applicants. We have pre-planning loans, which generally satisfy the kind of riskiest phase of development. We have post-planning loans through Scottish Enterprises REEF Fund, and we also have an innovation and infrastructure fund, which can assist community groups in more challenging circumstances in relation to renewable energy development. So, community startup grants. This startup grant can help funding towards, like I say, cost of early feasibility studies, early stage community capacity building, and, for instance, community consultation and other preparatory costs. Generally, to provide an example of the use of a community startup grant, I work with a number of rural communities who are developing renewable energy projects on the National Forest Estate through the Forestry Commission. Generally hydro projects. The community group will approach myself through CARES, will have a look at the project, help the group to devise a project plan, an approach to developing the scheme. We'll then assist community groups, for instance, with developing tenders for the procurement of a consultant to develop initial feasibility studies to identify, the resource and indeed the viability of schemes at an early stage. Community capacity building within groups as well, making sure that they are a proper entity as such for taking projects forward. Also, early stage community consultation, being a community focused scheme and organisation, we're certainly very, very keen on early community consultation and very robust community consultation at the outset. We've found that this creates a great mandate for moving projects forward, especially when they get into the later development stages. Now, the Community Startup Grant, it's capped at £10,000 and it's available for community groups to fund non-capital aspects of a project, like I say, early stage activities without which the installations would not go ahead. Generally, the costs of feasibility studies. Generally, the reason it says non-capital aspects of a project is, as some people may know, there is incompatibility between grant funding and feed-in tariff as well. Generally, if you're using grants for capital aspects of a project, this can preclude you from taking advantage of the feed-in tariff and associated state aid issues. But if it's for non-capital parts of the project, early feasibility work, yeah, then that can be grant funded. Generally, the information that would be provided in a grant-funded feasibility study is generally quite robust. And that information provided in that, such as a breakdown of projected capital costs, can be used to populate a pre-planning loan application, which I'll come to in a second. Another stream of funding that we have is a community buildings grant. The Scottish Government is aware that increased fuel costs over recent years, obviously impacting everyone, including community groups running community buildings. As with, everything else, high energy costs, inefficient heating, poor levels of insulation can contribute to quite significant running costs of community buildings, and can be challenging for communities and local groups to affordably run their buildings. To give you an example of a community group that we have supported in relation to that, the picture that you can see there, that was a group that I assisted in the Lochee area of Dundee. It's Lochee Boys and Girls Club. In order to provide a grant to a community group, community involvement and community impact is one of the main criteria, and we seek to make sure that the building was open to wider community groups. In the case of this facility, it's used as a boxing club, a kickboxing events. Also, they also have things like creches, job clubs, and you can see there's a wider community use of the building. This building in particular received a grant of around £20,000 to install an air source heat pump system. And additionally, insulation and energy efficiency measures. Obviously, we tried to take an approach associated with an energy hierarchy, would certainly seek to make sure that a building was energy efficient as possible before considering a renewable energy system there as well. With this group, I assisted the group to devise a tender for the works. This went out to around five companies. One was chosen to commission the work, and that was just at the tail end of spring, so I'll be in touch with them hopefully soon, now that it's time for heating buildings again. Eligibility for this scheme does have a number of caveats. The only community buildings that will be eligible for this must be within the lowest band, the lowest percentile of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. They have a website where you can map local areas, and they're given a value based upon how deprived those communities may be as well. And like I say, these tend to be more urban communities, but the definition of this is being reviewed to allow the scheme to better support rural communities. Quite often we find even higher costs in rural communities associated with being off mains gas, having to rely on expensive fuels such as LPG, oil, electricity to run these buildings as well. The grant offers 90% of the cost for eligible renewable energy installations in community buildings, and it can offer up to 100% of technical energy studies. The studies themselves, we can also put out to tender, get a consultant to come and do a technical review of buildings, which can identify areas that can be improved and funded by the grant. We are keen to see communities become involved in this as well. Hence the reason for them to provide 10% of the costs as well. And I've seen a variety of kind of novel fundraising ways for communities to raise that part of the funding as well. An important thing to think about with the community grant, buildings grant also as well, is this incompatibility with both the renewable heat incentive and the feed-in tariff. So we wouldn't be grant funding a renewable energy installation to generate a revenue as such for a community. It would be the free insulation, the free electricity, and the heat that would be associated with renewable energy projects. We do work hand in hand with some of our partner organisations to assist these groups, primarily the Climate Challenge Fund. They can look at the energy efficiency and provide funding for those parts of the development, and community buildings renewables can be funded through ourselves. The types of measures that we have installed through the Community Buildings Grant, as aforementioned, technical energy studies of buildings to highlight the opportunities for developments in community-owned buildings. Generally, other forms of heating, such as wood fuel, chip and pellet boilers, we've installed through this grant. Solar thermal hot water systems, obviously based upon the suitability of the technology for that, i.e. is there a water demand as such in the building that would satisfy the need for a solar thermal hot water system. Solar photovoltaic electricity systems, air, ground source heat pumps to provide heat. In some cases, small scale wind turbines, and as aforementioned, energy efficiency measures, for instance, insulation. The Lochee Boys and Girls Club benefited from cavity wall insulation, draft proofing, loft insulation, in order to make the building as energy efficient as possible, ultimately to cut down on the size of air source heat pump that would be required, and indeed to make that system operate more efficiently in a more energy efficient building. An example of where the Community Buildings Grant has been used is the old bank in Neilston. That benefited from solar thermal panels and a wood pellet boiler. This was a former bank which was gifted to the community. It has now been developed to provide a centre for the community with a cafe, office space, meeting space, and activity space for various organisations. We appraised the various options using a grant-funded feasibility study. So that would be putting a tender out, getting a consultant to come in and assess the building, and through that identify the need for measures such as insulation and renewable energy. And that benefited from a CARES grant of around £43,000 to install these measures. Okay, so another funding stream that we offer groups, both rural small to medium enterprises, national organisations, and indeed community groups, is the CARES pre-planning loan. This provides support to the development of locally owned renewable energy projects which provide wider community benefit. The core ethic of the CARES scheme is to benefit communities ultimately as well. And we've found that in developing renewable energy projects, the very early stages, the pre-planning stages, the feasibility work, can have significant risks associated with it. Generally risks associated with land tenure and leases, grid connection and grid constraints issues, planning issues, also as well, and the mitigation of planning risks, and indeed the raising of finance as well. Generally, community groups don't have a large asset base, so it can be significantly difficult for community groups to access loan funding for these quite risky pre-development stages. As mentioned previously, the core tenet of the CARE scheme is to try and provide the highest level of benefit for the wider community, and preference is given to these proposals. It is a competitive scheme as well, so like I say, preference is given to the proposals for projects that can demonstrate a wider community benefit. So the key features of the CARES pre-planning loan, it can cover up to 95% of pre-planning costs. That can include anything from feasibility studies, legal costs, planning costs, the cost for various studies associated with planning. It can also be used for things like early grid deposits, early equipment costs such as turbine deposits for hydro and for wind. We will expect both community groups and other applicants to provide 5% of the costs associated with that themselves. The maximum loan per entity is £150,000. The way it works is you wouldn't apply for a loan and get the £150,000 in your bank account. It's generally based upon quite a robust application process. For instance, community groups can access the aforementioned grant to commission a feasibility study. The robust information provided in that feasibility study, such as timescales, costs associated with each of the measures, can be used to populate the application form, and the approved loan amount, if successful, will be based upon the costs entered into that application form, and it's generally run on a draw-down basis. The loan amount will be approved, and when groups start to receive invoices, for instance, for various pieces of work, they can send the invoices to us and begin to draw down the loan. As a development officer, my role is to programme projects based upon the risk. We would phase the projects so that the high risk elements were looked at first and mitigated against things such as grid connection options, and any key planning risks. I would always encourage groups to have these looked at early in the development stage. As mentioned, applicants must contribute a minimum of 5% to the loan as well. But an important fact is that security is not required. As mentioned previously, sometimes it can be difficult, especially for community groups, if they don't have a large asset base to procure funding for these early risky stages. And in the case of the CARES pre-planning loan, security is not required. Now, one of the unique and novel things about the CARES pre-planning loan is the fact that it has a write-off facility. This is quite important for community groups developing renewable energy projects, basically due to the risk associated with the early development of these projects. There has to be, of course, a substantial reason for writing a loan off, and there would have to be documentary evidence provided, such as the project is not now financially viable, a reasonable cost grid connection cannot be secured, the project was, for instance, unable to secure planning permission, and it would be reasons such as these that would allow a loan to be written off. As mentioned previously, we tried to phase these loans to identify the very riskiest stages first of all, rather than, for instance, a group or organisation, for instance, drawing down a whole £150,000, and then we find an obvious difficulty at the end of that stage. So that's certainly something that we want to try and avoid. The interest associated with the loan is at 10%. I would suggest that is perhaps a couple of percent above what commercial rates would be, but that's certainly based upon the risk associated with these early projects, the fact that they are unsecured loans. But if you put that into the perspective of the fact that generally this pre-development stage can take, the pre-development stage up to due diligence, for instance, by a senior lender and ultimately financial close generally takes around 2 years. So there's not a significant time relatively for interest to accrue on these loans. They are paid back at financial close when capital funding is secured for a project. The loan would be rolled up into the finance and paid back at that point. As mentioned previously, it's a competitive process for the loans. Generally, applications are submitted on a quarterly basis. There is an independent non-technical panel which decides the approval of loans. Generally, they sit quarterly, and they are representative on that board from organisations such as the Forestry Commission of Scotland, the Big Lottery, and various other organisations. As mentioned, the finance is provided in stages. Invoices will be presented and the money will be drawn down on the production of invoices. In addition to the loan drawdown facility, at each stage of the project, development officers have a keen eye on these projects and can provide advice and assistance and support in relation to the pre-planning development of projects. So the basic requirements, the basic eligibility for the CARES pre-planning loan, the projects must be located in Scotland. And we have to have a declaration from organisations that the project would not proceed without the loan, basically the additionality principle as well. Before a loan is approved, there is quite an in-depth application form, and groups will have to provide information that the site is indeed viable, that the technology is viable. Access options to the site are confirmed, such as a letter of comfort from a landowner, so that the development will be able to proceed at some point in the future. We also have significant caveats in relation to community consultation as to the approval of these loans also as well. As mentioned, the repayment is in full on financial completion. So for instance, if a community group is seeking funding from a senior lender and goes through the due diligence process and reaches financial close, the loan will be paid back at that point and added onto the full capital finance that the project will carry from that stage forward. For community applicants, they must have a robust community action plan in place. We've found that this is a very robust mechanism for providing structure to community groups and how they will eventually spend any revenue that will come from that in the future. And funding must be approved and spent as per the agreed schedule. That allows to calculate the risk associated with projects in order to highlight any difficulties with projects as well, and indeed to maintain momentum in projects. So who can apply for the CARES pre-planning loan? There are a number of organisations which can apply. Obviously, community organisations themselves, they have to be a properly constituted, not-for-profit group, established and operating across a geographically defined community. These can be village associations, development trusts, these types of organisations. If, for instance, a group would like to take a project forward, they're not quite at that stage, they can access the aforementioned grant funding to allow them to get to the stage where they are a constituted group, and we can provide advice and support through that process as well. Other applicants can include national and regional organisations. Typically, these are charitable bodies, or alternatively housing associations. Educational institutions can all apply for the CARES pre-planning loan. In addition to this, we can provide the loan to commercial businesses, generally in a rural location, such as farmers, land managers, rural small to medium enterprises, and profit distributing cooperatives. And indeed, we have a variety of joint ventures between eligible applicants as well. For instance, in Fife at the moment, I have a project which is a joint venture between a housing association and a commercial developer. Of course, the loan will just be assigned to the eligible part of that being the housing association. One important thing to note for applicants that are not community groups, obviously the revenue that would be generated from a positive outcome from these projects, as far as a community group are concerned, will be detailed in their community action plan. For instance, they may have plans to tackle environmental issues in their area, social issues, economic issues in their area, and that will be addressed in their community action plan. National or regional organisations and indeed rural business applicants do have other caveats associated with their loan. Primarily the fact that if accepting the loan, they sign up to an agreement to provide at least £10,000 per megawatt to a local community organisation. And generally these organisations will have to be approached, identified at the application stage as well. It is quite a robust application process in relation to that, and we would expect quite significant community consultation and information about that detailed in the application form there as well. Ultimately, as mentioned before, the CARE scheme is there to benefit communities, and it's very important, like I say, to highlight that these types of organisations are obliged to provide this £10,000 per megawatt to a local beneficiary. Similar to community groups, we are there to support rural business applicants through the whole process as well, whether it be through site viability, through finance in the future, and indeed through the planning process, grid connection issues. We can provide supports and information relating to these as well. We can also provide these types of applicants with information on the best approaches to communities as well. So what sort of projects can be considered? What sort of costs can the CARES pre-planning loan be used for? So generally it's renewable energy projects that can demonstrate a high level of benefit to a local community area. These can be new projects not yet initiated, or they can be existing projects that have went through a bit of development already, and developments which would not otherwise proceed without a CARES loan involvement. Costs, all reasonable costs associated with developing a project through to financial completion. Costs associated with taking it through the planning process, grid connection process. Like I said, we can provide, these funds can be used towards grid connection deposits, turbine deposits, capital deposits for equipment as such, and other associated development costs such as project management fees, legal costs, these types of issues. Now, as mentioned, the loan does have a write-off facility, and it's probably important to look into that in a bit more detail. It's quite, the conditions of write-off are quite stringent. If they were going to write a loan off, you would have to provide, for instance, a detailed study indicating the project is not now feasible. An example of that I've came across recently was a community group attempting to put a low-head Archimedes screw type hydro generating station. Unfortunately, there was a flood risk associated with the development of that scheme, and that would satisfy the fact that that project would not now be feasible. So relatively robust information required to back up that decision to not go forward with that project. Other reasons that would satisfy a write-off if you're unable to finalise a site options agreement to develop the project further through perhaps legal complications, or indeed through an unreasonable rental or purchase agreement offered by a landowner. Obviously, if a planning application is not consented, that would satisfy the loan write-off facility. If grid connection cannot be secured, the current environment can be quite challenging for community projects, as indeed larger projects, to obtain grid connections within a reasonable time frame. And indeed, obviously, if the project is now no longer viable, if a grid connection is very weak in a local area, and a kind of smallish size project is offered a grid connection, but for instance it may be £500,000, the project may indeed from that stage be no longer financially viable. Through assistance, we can help community groups and commercial business applicants look at the finances of a project. Indeed, we would encourage the development, for instance, of business plans, financial appraisals, ongoing, as well as project development through, for instance, the planning process. If the loan facility does get written off, and for instance, at some point in the future, the project takes off again, the Scottish Government does seek an agreement at the write-off stage that it would seek repayment of the loan with interest if that project did go ahead within the next 10 years. So that's the pre-planning loan scheme, like I say, that can assist community groups, rural applicants with the very early stages there as well. Now, the next stage that we can assist groups with is a post-planning loan. This is only available for community groups themselves, so it wouldn't be available to rural small to medium enterprises or indeed national organisations, housing associations as such. It is specifically for community projects. And the post-planning loan is delivered through our partners at the Scottish Investment Bank through what's known as the Renewable Energy Investment Fund, or REIF. This is delivered, like I say, on behalf of the Scottish Government through Scottish Enterprise. And it's designed to build on the early stage support that's given through the CARES scheme. Support for projects at a delivery stage, but which still have challenging funding gaps. In my experience as a development officer, you can find with projects that after they've secured planning permission, for instance, there can be quite a gap in timescale and significant further work to be carried on between the securing or consenting of planning permission and indeed reaching financial close with a senior lender. One of the hydro projects that I work on, for instance, has a grid connection. It has been consented, fully licensed in relation to a car licence for a hydro project. But it can take, in some cases, up to 6 months to enter into negotiations with senior lenders, such as Triodos Bank, for instance. And throughout that process, there are funds required, for instance, for ongoing turbine interim payments, for grid connection payments. For instance, you'll tend to find that on acceptance of a grid offer, the distribution network operator will require, for instance, a 10% deposit, but a few months after that, there can be a second payment, generally up to around 40% for I would imagine, the equipment cost that the DNO has to get. So there can be significant funding gaps, and the CARES scheme through REIF is designed to assist community groups through that process and address the challenging funding gaps that can be ongoing until financial closure with a senior lender. So a wee bit more about the REEF fund itself. So they provide renewable energy projects with access to loan funding and equity finance after the planning stage. This is to help communities reach financial closure and maximise their contribution in community-led renewable energy projects. The Renewable Energy Investment Fund can be seen also as unlocking finance with other senior lenders. It tends to be gap funding or match finance. For instance, a senior lender may come in and offer 80% of the cost, 90% of the costs, the capital cost that is for a project, and the Renewable Energy Investment Fund can make up the shortfall there as well. They also will go through the due diligence process hand in hand as a consortium of funders and can assist community groups, like I say, in the relationship with a senior lender there as well. It can also support community investment in larger scale commercial renewable energy projects. An example being, I mentioned earlier, the Forestry Commission estate, the National Forest Land Scheme. The Forestry Commission have opened that up to commercial developments with an obligation on commercial developers to offer up to a 49% share to local community groups in these developments. And the REEF Fund can assist community groups in raising the capital finance to allow them to purchase an equity stake in these larger commercial developer-led projects. So the criteria for the REEF Fund, similarly to the pre-planning loan, projects of course must be located in Scotland. They must provide a tangible benefit or a demonstrated benefit to the economy of Scotland also, and indeed deliver the energy from a renewable resource as well. It must also benefit the community, and there must be robust evidence presented that the project will indeed benefit the local community in which the project is based. As with most government funding, there are let's say time periods that these funding is available. At the moment, this funding is available up into March 2016. Groups generally have to have most things in place in order to approach the Renewable Energy Investment Fund. And by that, what I mean is certainly the group would generally have to be expected to have received planning permission, be fully licensed, have a grid connection secured, and indeed have a lease or an option to develop the site. The reason being that these are obviously high risk elements, and when these things are in place, it significantly de-risks projects and makes it much more attractive for commercial investment, whether it through be a traditional senior lender or indeed the REEF fund. Another criteria for the REEF fund would have expected groups to have entered into initial negotiations, certainly with other lenders, and be able to identify a possible proposed funding package for the capital elements. Like I say, REEF can provide almost a kind of top-up facility and assist in the negotiations with these senior lenders. And obviously, they must have a demonstrated funding gap. For instance, a senior lender providing 80-90% of the funding. The 10% funding gap is where the Renewable Energy Investment Fund can assist. So prior to the release of any REEF funding, like I mentioned, all licenses, approvals, proof of legal right to develop the sites must be in place. For community-led deals, if the full funding package is not in place at the completion of the REEF funding, i.e. after going through a mini due diligence as such with the REEF bankers, evidence of an indicative offer from a senior commercial lender is required also there as well. Sometimes REEF can be presented with more bespoke or high risk deals. These will be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and this will be obviously the risk will be reflected on the size of the deal and the proportion of participation by the REEF fund. A full funding package needs to be in place at legal completion for these schemes. It's probably quite important to note that the application to the REEF fund is actually through the CARES scheme. Development officers can assist community groups with filling in the application form basically for that. It goes through the same process as the pre-planning loan, i.e. It will be submitted to the CARES independent panel. The panel themselves don't approve the actual funding, but they will approve projects to move forward to speak to the Scottish Investment Bank. Through the CARES scheme, we have a consortium approach. We do have a partner in Ricardo AEA Energy as our technical consultants, and one of their roles in the scheme is to have a good look over projects to make sure they are what we call REEF ready. They'll have a look at the financial aspects of the project, at the licensing, the approval, to make sure that projects that are going forward to the REEF fund are relatively robust as well. To give you an idea, I recently took a hydro project based in Callander through to the CARES panel. They were seeking funds prior to financial close for aforementioned things like a turbine deposit, significant payments for that, and they managed to go through to REEF and managed to secure in the region of around £300,000 of funding, some of that pre-financial close to help them, and some of that as match funding for the senior lender that they are dealing with. It is Triodos Bank that community group are helping. That's for a 425 kilowatts hydro scheme coming down the side of Benledi in Callander. We're expecting that to reach financial close relatively soon, and after that stage it will be a matter of putting out the construction to tender to take that project forward. Okay, so another stream of funding which is available through the CARE scheme and maybe of most interest that I could perhaps suggest to in relation to the mainstreaming innovation initiative is our Infrastructure and Innovation Fund. Now, this is basically a grant for communities specifically to investigate and develop projects that can link local energy generation with local energy use, innovative distribution of energy, and indeed storage solutions. We are in quite a restrictive time at the moment as far as things like grid connection is concerned. Very long lead-in times in places such as Argyll, certainly the islands of Scotland, Orkney, Shetland as such. Indeed, Shetland does not have a grid connection to the mainland and has its own generators. So the Infrastructure and Innovation Fund is to look into novel solutions to help communities in relation to energy storage, network management technologies there as well. Quite often there is a demand for the energy from renewable energy generation, but the distribution infrastructure is quite simply doesn't have the capacity to take the energy, and this is to help provide novel solutions associated with the challenges that can be along with renewable energy generation. It can help address the barriers and help integrate energy demand in local communities with energy generation as well. This fund was opened in May 2012 by the Scottish Government and is delivered through Local Energy Scotland as part of the CARES contract. At the moment, we have over 20 projects under development through the Infrastructure and Innovation Fund. We have 5 consortium projects with a number of communities in partnership with other organisations to develop novel solutions through the Innovation and Infrastructure Fund. Of course, it would have to be community-led and certainly not for profits as well. So it's not for access for commercial purposes as such. And generally, these projects associated with the Innovation and Infrastructure Fund are related to around 30 megawatts of embedded local community generation capacity. So the types of projects that can be supported through the Innovation and Infrastructure, there's 4 kind of basic categories of work that we've came across in relation to these kind of constraints. Firstly, active network management. We have an initiative, Community Power Down Orkney, and that's associated with active demand management on the Orkney registered power zone. So this project access funds to look at investigating using local schools to take wind-powered energy for heat loads at times of network constraints, and we can commission work funded by the Innovation and Infrastructure Fund to assist projects such as that. From the demand management side of things, we have projects such as the Argyll Islands. We helped them with an energy audit to evaluate the scope for demand side management for constrained community projects on the islands of Mull, Islay, Jura, Colonsay and Gia. Other areas which the funding has been used is for local energy supply. The Applecross Community Trust in North Highland have used this fund to investigate curtailment analysis and private wire design for a grid-constrained micro hydro system where they will develop their basically own local grid to distribute the energy from their local hydro scheme to the local community as well. Other innovative work that has been funded using the CARES Innovation and Infrastructure scheme. We have an initiative up in Shetland where the development company up there have been investigating load control technologies for space heating and indeed an electric minibus charging from the locally owned 50 kilowatts turbine. Other interesting initiatives I've heard in Shetland are things like you may not think that energy can be stored as ice, but there's a project up there that can use excess electricity for ice production to assist with things like fisheries processing as well. So any excess electricity can be used in quite novel ways as well. Another quite significant part of the work through the CARES scheme delivered by Local Energy Scotland is to assist communities with community benefits from commercial developments. In addition to the regionally based local development officers, we actually have a specific community benefits development officer that can assist communities at a national scale with the receipts of community benefit from commercial projects, and really provides support and assistance based on previous experience and best practice guidelines for those in discussion with commercial developers regarding community benefit payments and schemes. We are, as part of the CARES scheme, we also update the Scottish Government's register of community benefits from renewables. That's quite interesting to go have a look at that online. It's a voluntary scheme, both from community groups, adding information about what they may spend community benefit funds on. This gives good networking information for other community groups that are approached by commercial developers in relation to what things that this money can actually be spent on. We have a community benefit guidance toolkit, which is available online, a series of modules that community groups can work through, going from initial approach from developers through to actually spending and getting structures in place to assist them spending funds as well. As part of the register of community benefits from renewables, commercial developers such as Scottish and Southern, Scottish Power Renewables, for instance, can put information on the benefit of community benefit on the community register and identify the level, for instance, of community benefit payments that are made by these developers. So if communities are approached with, for instance, a certain amount of money, they can have a look on this and see, what other commercial developers have been offering community groups to see where they stand. And we are also in the process of developing guidance for commercial developers on good practice in dealing with community benefits, and that's due to be rolled out in January 2014, which will provide robust guidance based upon Scottish Government guidelines on best practice associated with developer approaches to local communities. And we're keen to see that best practice being taken up and rolled out. So that'll be available in January. As mentioned, the Register of Community Benefits provides information and support through that community benefit process, can provide information about what communities have spent that money on, ideas, advice for communities looking to ensure that those funds are spent wisely. And like I say, it does rely on goodwill from the communities and commercial developers to update this information. It's also good to have a look at this just to see, the lessons that are learned, the experiences of various communities, and this can be used in quite useful knowledge transfer opportunities between community groups and indeed the developers themselves. As mentioned, we do have a community benefit guidance package available on the website. As mentioned, this is a suite of learning topics to help guide communities through the community benefit process from the outset, or you can come in on an ad hoc basis at the relevant chapters and get good advice in relation to the stage that projects may be at, through either setting up as a legal entity, having proper governance, setting up community action plans, and indeed the governance of the fund and the distribution of monies associated with these funds. So best practice guidance, and we have a great deal of experience in assisting communities with community benefits, and most of that experience is demonstrated in the community benefit guidance package. So resources available through the CARES scheme. We have an in-depth community renewable energy handbook, which is basically full of really good kind of technical information about the various technologies, from hydro, wind, anaerobic digestion, combined heat and power, and indeed the more innovative technologies funded through the Innovation and Infrastructure Fund. So more of a kind of technical manual. It can go through systems requirements, whether a technology may indeed be suitable for a specific resource, a specific location, and whether it can be useful for community groups indeed themselves. It also provides an introduction to the available schemes and grants that are available through the CARES scheme, and indeed wider supports. It gives really good tips for project developments, such as the environmental aspects of projects, the planning process, grid connection, financial assistance as well, and can also provide a number of good case studies to provide a connection for communities to identify with other community groups that have been through a similar process. In support of the Renewable Energy Handbook, due out within the next few weeks, we have a Community and Renewable Energy Toolkit, which is more of a functional publication, which can guide communities through the actual development process. Economic appraisal of projects, financial appraisal of projects. It's a dynamic document that can provide links to other organisations that can provide support to communities through this process. Setting up of different structures, what the best structure would be for a community group, for instance, a limited company, a cooperative approach to developing renewable energy. We can provide advice on the capital stages of a project. It's quite challenging for community groups to access funding for these projects at the moment. The Cooperative Bank has recently withdrawn from the sector, which really just leaves Triodos Bank as the main senior lender. But this could be viewed positively. Makes groups and space in the market for more innovative funding solutions, such as cooperative approaches, crowdfunding approaches, the issuing of shares to local communities to raise funding, and indeed I've heard of things like local community bond issues to raise additional finance for these projects. So certainly a very exciting part of the sector at the moment there as well. So just to recap, Local Energy Scotland does have offices based throughout Scotland. We're very happy to take inquiries at any level of approach, from an initial idea to advice on capital funding. We can become involved in the project ourselves. We can signpost you to other areas. We do have a local central as well as local development officers. We do have a central number which people can access, and through that the inquiries can be disseminated to local development officers on the ground, and we can give you excellent advice on the support and the funds that are available through the CARE scheme. And there's a few references there at the end if anybody would like to take advantage of that. One quite interesting one that's probably worth a look is obviously the Scottish Government's 2020 route map for renewable energy development in Scotland, which highlights the main policy and strategy areas for meeting the targets, such as the 100% of renewable energy electricity equivalents by 2020, 11% of renewable energy equivalent heat demand by 2020, and indeed in relation to the community sector, 500 megawatts of community and locally owned renewable energy in Scotland by 2020. So that's the presentation. I'm looking forward to perhaps answering a few of your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. We have a few questions from online viewers. Let's start immediately. Firdaus Mohammed Suki of Glasgow Cladonia University asks, does CARES provide any funding for research purposes? How could that be integrated in the funding from CARES?
Okay. Well, generally the grant funding, the pre-planning loan funding is primarily associated to the communities themselves to allow them to develop renewable energy projects. But in relation to the Infrastructure and Innovation Fund, there can be consortium approaches to specific challenges, let's say, associated with that. This fund can be used, for instance, for feasibility work, investigative purposes there as well, but it would generally have to be community-led and a not-for-profit development as well. For instance, we have seen, ESCOs being developed, more novel ideas being researched, but it would likely be for the communities themselves to decide to fund research. So they would definitely lead.
Thank you. Terry O'Hara from Dynamic Installation Solutions Limited is asking, can a rural SME apply for the loan for a community project in a non-rural location?
Generally, there is a caveat that rural applicants must have a local connection to the area, so the business will either own the land in that rural area, or they'll operate a business, for instance, in that local area. So there certainly has to be a general geographic connection. So, like I say, generally it would have to be in that particular geographic area to take advantage of that. The rural SME would certainly have no problem applying for their own project in that rural location themselves. Generally, a rural small to medium enterprise would do it in their own area as such there as well. The community project in a non-rural location would tend to apply for the funds themselves, and for instance then subcontract through the CARES funding, for instance for feasibility studies and development work.
Thank you. A question from Jerry Kelly of Ecotech Building Management. Is the Infrastructure and Innovation Fund available to local authorities' social housing developments?
Generally, as mentioned with the initial question there, it's generally available for communities themselves and community-led projects to develop, innovative solutions to active network demand management, these types of projects as well. So it would generally have to be community-led. There is other support for local authorities and social housing departments through the Warm Homes Fund, which is another scheme developed through managed by the Energy Saving Trust, in addition to other schemes such as Resource Efficient Scotland, managed by Zero Waste Scotland, which can provide additional support to housing associations there as well. Housing associations can develop their own renewable energy projects, but with the caveat that they must provide the £10,000 per megawatts of community benefits.
Okay. Well, I have some questions while we are waiting for other questions from our viewers. How much a renewable energy investment fund can fund in terms of percentage and or total value of a project? Is there a cap regarding funding?
Okay. Well, there is actually no cap. It would be on a case-by-case basis that the refund would consider projects, whether it be a capital investment in a commercial development-led development scheme, for instance, a community planning perhaps to buy a share in the form of a virtual turbine as part of a development there as well. But there is no essential cap on this. Ultimately, it depends upon the viability of the project, the financial robustness of the project, and there is indeed, like I say, no absolute cap on the funding. The reef bankers will decide on a case-by-case basis. The amounts of the percentage of funding that they can provide, generally, as mentioned before, it is sort of match funding or gap funding. But I do know, for instance, that the reef fund is looking to wholly fund a number of projects. There is a pilot being rolled out, basically in response to the challenging financial environment associated with projects. It's quite strange, but in this sector, you'll find it quite easy, if I can say that, to get a loan of, for instance, £1.5 million, but you'll find it extremely challenging to get a loan of £400,000. The reason being, I believe, that the funders are obviously interested in quite juicy, low-hanging fruits and tend to go for projects that they may receive the kind of highest returns, which leaves it very, very challenging for community-led energy projects. They tend to be at the scale, where it's in perhaps that level of funding from around £200,000 up to £1 million there as well. So certainly the reef fund is rolling out a scheme which is looking to fully fund up to 4 projects going forward.
So does it mean that if communities aggregate several smaller projects, they might have better chances of getting funding?
Absolutely, and that's something that's being looked at the moment by the Renewable Energy Investment Fund, and indeed the wider community sector through CARES. CARES are keen, if we have a number of renewable energy projects, to perhaps look at ways where these projects can combine together in a sense of seeking, financial support. But that's certainly something that's ongoing and is certainly being looked at the moment, is coming together of communities to approach financial institutions to gain larger amounts of finance.
One detail, at what stage should communities seek information from planning officers at local authorities and also for power suppliers regarding connections with grid?
Okay. Well, firstly, as far as planning is concerned, we always encourage very early consultation with what we would call the statutory consultees. Obviously, at the initial feasibility study stage, it's good to speak to the planners just to gauge their opinion. Generally, planners are reasonably approachable, and they can highlight any early showstoppers. We wouldn't like projects to have money spent, for instance, and have loan liabilities, when a few weeks down the road they speak to the planner and the planner is absolutely not, you can't develop in this area. For instance, national parks have their own planning authorities there as well. So in order to get an idea of perhaps the planning restrictions, the compliance required I would always encourage very early consultation with the planning. So even at the concept stage of a project, I would encourage back and forward iterative consultation with groups such as the planners, and indeed general projects, consulting with the statutory consultees such as Scottish National Heritage, SEPA, these types of people, to gauge their response to the idea for the project. So yes, we do believe in very early networking with these organisations.
Okay. Well, we are now close to 2 o'clock, so we will close now our webinar. I would like to thank you for your detailed presentation and encourage our online viewers, if they have any additional questions, just to send them to us and we will forward to you. But before we close our webinar, I would just like to draw attention of our viewers about forthcoming webinars and live events related to funding for low carbon infrastructure projects. The next webinar will be on 9th of October, and it's entitled Local Energy Economies, Integrating Low Carbon Infrastructures and Maximizing the Benefits to Local Communities, and it will be delivered by Community Energy Scotland. Following that, we have 2 live events. One is on 29th of October, and it will be presented or organized in collaboration with Scotland Europa. It is about Horizon 2020, forthcoming European funding for different types of projects, and this one will focus on understanding the opportunities for Scotland in relation to construction. And on 7th of November, we have a live event entitled Localized Energy Generation and Distribution, Funding, Research and Practice. And here we will have speakers from Technology Strategy Board about their forthcoming funding that will start in January next year, again from CARES, CES, Community Energy Scotland, and researchers providing case studies and talking about research related to low carbon infrastructures integration. Please book places for all these events on our website. Just go to Events tab and then you will see the list of all forthcoming events. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.